But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard.
In the state of South Carolina, all it takes to be jailed for missing the child support payment is one missed payment in 5 days, which is less than a week. In 2015, Walter Lamar Scott was gunned down by a North Charleston police officer by the name of Michael Slager. People protested, people were outraged, and there was a lot of people out there who were confused as to how a man whose only offense was missing a child support payment ends up being gunned down in the back. Well, there's more to the story than this. Here's the other side of the story that the media didn't tell you about the Walter Scott story. Now, do keep in mind that South Carolina only has 5.1 million people in the whole state, so if 13.2% of those 18,848 people were incarcerated at the cost of $14,545, that means that a state with only 5.1 million people spent no less than $36.1 million, which is more than 7 times the dollar amount per person, to lock up disproportionately black men on a first-time nonviolent offense when they only had a week to pay. I'm going to reveal something that the world does not know about Walter Scott and part of the reason why he got gunned down. What you see before you is a screenshot from the FBI's own webpage, and this information is about the FBI's National Crime Information Center report listing. And this listing is usually reserved for terrorists and people who go on mass shootings, hence why you have the C in the NCIC, which stands for crime and not civil. And in 2012, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, Chief Mark Keel sent a letter to the South Carolina Attorney General's office with the question of, should people be placed into the NCIC for non-criminal offenses? And in the return letter, which is publicly available, the South Carolina Attorney General's office flat out told Mark Keel and every law enforcement officer and court in the whole state that people should not be placed into the NCIC for civil offenses because the NCIC was intended for criminal offenses, meaning that if someone misses a child support payment, you are not supposed to put them into the NCIC. Now, that opinion was published in 2012 and Walter Scott was shot in 2015. So why is it that Walter Scott was ever entered into the NCIC? You see, if his family knew that, they could sue the daylights out of South Carolina right now. Because Walter Scott getting shot makes a lot more sense because the officer who shot him, Michael Slager, was a law enforcement officer in the state of South Carolina in North Charleston. And North Charleston is a known dangerous area. So when Walter Scott gets pulled over and gets stopped, and when Michael Slager sees that he's in the NCIC, Michael Slager is thinking, okay, this is a very dangerous area. I understand that this list is usually reserved for someone who's like a terrorist or an actual violent offender, and this guy is running. So let me go ahead and shoot him, because if I don't shoot him, I could be letting the terrorists run free. Now, Michael Slager should not have shot Walter Scott in the back. That is without question. But you see, it wasn't just Michael Slager who pulled that trigger. It was also the South Carolina government, the courts, and especially the family courts, who have judges who routinely go after people who speak out against judges such as Brenda Bryant and myself and many, many, many others. This man was placed into the NCIC as a violent offender for missing a child support payment, even though missing a child support payment is not a violent offense. It's not even a criminal offense. I did my own digging and found this out. Now, the person who originally told me this, it was the woman who was the subject of my last video, who is currently being retaliated against in the state of South Carolina, who was also placed into the NCIC as a violent offender, even though she wasn't a violent offender, and the correctional facility in North Carolina who had her in custody called South Carolina and informed them to cease placing people into the NCIC as violent offenders when they're not violent offenders. Because when an officer encounters that person, they're thinking they're a terrorist or a violent offender. And that places the officer and the individual in question in a situation in which both don't need to be in. Allow me to quote something from the Marshall Project, and this is a nonprofit who only cares about criminal justice reform. In South Carolina, at least 1 in 8 people in jail are there on contempt of court charges related to late or unpaid child support orders. Nationally, as many as 50,000 parents may be in jail on those charges, though the exact number is uncertain, mainly because, quote, contempt of court end quote, is a general charge that does not only apply to child support cases. The best available data suggests that a majority of these jailed parents are black fathers. Now, how bad does this actually get? Well, here's a quote from MSNBC from an article titled, "How Falling Behind on Child Support Can End in Jail." It says here, 2 surveys of county jails in South Carolina conducted in the last decade found that at least 1 out of every 8 incarcerated people were there because they had been held in contempt of court for not paying child support. Under South Carolina law, if a family receives public benefits, it takes only 5 days of a non-custodial parent, usually a father, falling behind on a payment to trigger a civil contempt hearing that could mean ending up in jail for up to a year. And unlike many other states, South Carolina doesn't allow modifications for how much child support is owed if the parent is incarcerated, whether for owing child support or another reason. The result in such states without such modifications is that people can easily leave jail owing $15,000 to $30,000 in child support, in addition to other fees related to their incarceration. Do you understand what MSNBC and the Marshall Project and the ACLU and so many other organizations have been trying to tell you this whole time about South Carolina's child support enforcement and their child support laws? What they're basically saying is that the laws were not designed for the rich and the famous and the powerful. It was designed for poor people so that you have a reason to extract fines from them. You can get prison labor, you can get federal funds, and on top of that, this gives the cops who are the bad apples an excuse to harass and intimidate black men when they otherwise couldn't justify doing so. Think about it for a second. If you understand that South Carolina is a poor state, and if you understand that the average job does not even pay you within the first week, why would you design laws like this unless you knew that you have a large population of poor black people and poor white people that you can justify throwing in jail over and over and over again under the guise of these being deadbeat fathers, when the truth is, had people read the child support laws and realized how racist and draconian South Carolina is, they would never fix their mouth to make such a statement. Because whether or not Walter Scott owed a child support payment, his black life mattered. In fact, every black father's life matters. I don't think owing anything, and especially in a case of a state that is so draconian, means that your life matters less. And just me making that statement, I know that somebody's gonna be in the comment section or somebody's gonna approach me and they're gonna say, well, white people were slaves too. Well, you're right, they were slaves, and they're targeting mostly black fathers, but they're also targeting poor white fathers. And back in the day, it was the poor white people who were slaves. So there's no point in you arguing, because when you mention white slavery and I mentioned the 13th Amendment and what's happening in South Carolina, you're only proving my point. You're right, slavery did exist. It certainly happened to white people, and it's happening right now, and yet for some reason the political right in South Carolina is awfully silent, and yet they have the nerve and the audacity to wonder why people are rioting and protesting. Well, my response to them is zip it. You know exactly why people are angry. You know exactly why people are upset. And it's not just the cops and the courts and the politicians who are sitting around saying, why are people so upset? There are political hacks in South Carolina who are on the political right for the most part, who are going around saying things like, why are people so upset? Well, let me explain to you the reason why in a very, very simplistic way. It's because black people are tired of being treated like niggas, and poor white people wish they had your money so that they wouldn't have to be niggas too. That's the problem here. This is the new Jim Crow. And yet there are some people out there who are so deaf, who are so slow, that they refuse to see that. Because apparently abuse is not abuse so long as the person abusing you has an R behind their name.